Welcome back. I'm Becca.
And I am Bree, and this is Spooky Happy Hour. So, guys, we are gonna do some stuff a little differently today.
We're gonna mix it
Um,
up.
we are, and it's not just because it's the season one finale, but it is because this episode is super special to us. So we're not doing an update this week. I think that the information about the location is something that you really need to hear and experience and not have any of our own experiences in your brain whenever you're listening to these stories.
Yeah, for sure. And also, who cares what we did this week? Be honest.
Yeah, like you heard so much of it last episode.
Yeah.
So there's no need for us to delay it at all.
hmm
But we do want to throw out a disclaimer that
hmm
some of these stories are going to be really hard to listen to. It could be hard to watch as well. So severe stories of abuse and torment are going to be talked about. So we want you to know yourselves, take a moment to reflect, and really proceed at your own risks. If you have to take some breaks during the time, please do so.
Yeah. For those who know about Pennhurst, who have watched the Destination Fear, Project Fear, anybody else who's been there from YouTube or other ghost hunting shows, you'll kind of know a little bit about the history, but we may have added a few things just to mix it up. So we are going to get right into today's episode. So let's get on to the history of this beast of a place.
Absolutely. Before it was commonly referred to as Pennhurst, the Eastern Pennsylvania Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic was leading the nation in a trend to separate those with developmental and intellectual disabilities from mainstream society. They were referred to as degenerative, unfit, and defective, leaving quarantine as their only option for treatment. From its inception in 1908, overcrowding plagued the deaf, blind, disabled, criminals, and orphans that society dumped there. The overcrowding never ended, and the institution closed for good in 1987.
Also known as the Shame of Pennsylvania, Pennhurst housed 10,500 patients in its entirety. 30 buildings sat hidden away over 1,400 acres, making its own self sufficient community cut off from the outside world. In 1960, 2,791 patients were housed here, with 900 over its capacity. They saw an increase in overwhelmed parents dropping their kids off for treatment but never returning, resulting in the children being a ward of the state. At its peak, more than 3,500 people were in Pennhurst's legal custodial care. Only 9 general medical doctors and 2 psychiatrics were on staff to serve the masses. Out of 900 women living on campus, they never received specialized care from a gynecologist. 11 teachers were staffed to provide rehabilitation and education, but none of them had any formalized training in special education.
It was a byproduct of a self proclaimed progressive era when the solution to dealing with disability was forced segregation and sterilization. Since the 18th century, a similarly self proclaimed age of enlightenment, people with illness and disabilities were labeled defective. As late as 1820, such defectives, along with other dependent, much more deviant groups, such as the sick and the poor, were grouped together and sold to the lowest bidder. A similarly conceived philosophy of disposal at the lowest cost was played out time and time again at Pennhurst. If only slowly and person by person, a growing and maturing society reconsidered this philosophy. But the history written at Pennhurst demonstrated that was once held out as the only right option for care was, in fact, hopelessly wrong.
Dr. James Conroy, who is now the co president of Pennhurst Memorial Alliance, first visited the facility after obtaining his degree in Pennhurst's most populated years. He remembered driving home crying after witnessing 3,000 people living in conditions that he wouldn't even put his dog in for the weekend. Several human rights violations occurred in this isolated setting. Their seclusion enabled staff members to hide what happened there. Patients were chained to their cribs or beds, their teeth removed if they bit someone, and were thrown across the room and beaten by staff. Aggressive residents would attack other patients with broom handles or much worse. They lived in such close quarters, beds that were separated by only 6 inches apart, and 50 adolescents at a time living in one room. Sexual abuse among residents was very common here at the time.
In 1986, Bill Baldini, a news anchor for a national television station, wrote and starred in a documentary expose titled Suffer the Little Children. It was a 5-part series about the horrors of Pennhurst, and it was shown to the world. A cameraman was said to have walked into the building, saw the conditions, and immediately had to exit to vomit because of the stench. After this expose, the decades of lawsuits written before it and those that came after resulted in the closure of Pennhurst in 1987. Guys, we watched the documentary
Mhm.
before doing this episode, before writing our notes, before rewatching Destination Sphere's episode, and it was really awful. There were
Mhm.
multiple points in time as I was preparing for the episode that I had to take a break. And I think that I experienced so much of this as a counselor. I'm
Mhm.
hearing horrific stories pretty much all day long, and
Mhm.
I've grown accustomed to being able to compartmentalize them so that I
Mhm.
can be good at my job, because it's not about how I feel really in those
Right.
moments. It's about how they feel and what they've experienced, and I'm just holding space. I'm just
Mhm.
giving them this well-deserved moment of safety to be able to talk about the horrifics that have happened in their lives and help them through it, and I
Mhm.
had to stop multiple times. The
Yeah.
readings that I was doing, like the all of the lawsuits that we had just mentioned, I was reading like their case files and
Jeez.
feeling queasy.
Mhm. Yeah, when you told me about it, I had no idea about this, and then I hadn't rewatched this episode in a long time because there is a little bit of a snippet in the episode, and they do show actual footage, and it's just so crazy to me, like, seeing it be on the news, and I'm like, "That really?" To me, I know we're in 2024, but it wasn't that long ago.
No.
Like, just absolutely wild, and seeing everyone just looked almost the same. Everyone looked similar. They all had shaved
Mhm.
heads. They were all so thin. Obviously, they could not show like the one I watched, I couldn't see like the full face of someone, but even like listening to some of them was heartbreaking. And then actually going to Pennhurst and then us hearing a few things on the speaker box, like, that just, like, hit me, like, it hit me like a wall, and I'm just like, "No wonder I got so emotional when I
Yeah.
was there." It just that hit me. I wanted to cry and puke.
It's
Like
almost like we did it in reverse, right? Like, we
yeah.
knew about it, we knew about its infamous, like, haunted history, a little bit about, like, its actual history, and
Mhm,
then we went there, experienced it for ourselves, but in a way that was, this big celebrated type of event,
mhm,
and now we're finding out all about, like, even more about the darkness that we already knew was there, and I'm intrigued how we will connect to it when we go back.
mhm. Oh, 100%, and I think too yes, we were excited to go. I have never been to a location like that. I've never done anything to do with, like, ghost hunting myself because there's nothing around here, unfortunately. But being there, like, I was just drawn to it almost, and now I'm just like, now that I've been in that setting, now that I've experienced it, and just also hearing about the history, it also makes me want to know more about other locations and go to those locations.
And I don't
So
know what about, like, we've gone through so many awful histories, right?
mhm,
So many terrible stories about all of the times that people had in all of these locations that were of torment and abuse and
mhm,
all of that stuff. And for some reason, Pennhurst just it hits really differently. I don't know if it was
mhm,
because most of the population was severely disabled people, and
Mhm.
they called them all children, and it didn't mean that all of them were actually children. There were
No.
grown men who were 48 years old, 36 years old, grown
Mhm.
men that had been put here too, so there was no age gap either. There
No.
no cap on their age admission, so even though they all called them little children, they weren't just little children.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I remember they were speaking with one guy who I think he said he was 19 when his parents dropped him off, and he had been there for a year, and he was 20, and he was like, "I miss my mom, I miss my dad, they haven't been here since." And he was, like, hoping to see them again, and he sounded fairly positive, but at the same time, it's just heartbreaking, like 19, and there were cases of people who were or children who were 5 months put there.
They had
Like,
like a whole ward dedicated to babies.
right? Like, and just to leave them there, I couldn't imagine, and then just not going back. Like, criminals who are in a jail have people, family members going to see them. And I couldn't imagine like the comparison to that. Like
There are
just like,
literal
bye.
serial killers that women send their freaking underwear
Oh, I
to and write love
know.
letters to, but
Like,
these poor individuals just were left in seclusion and never even knew if they were going to see their families ever again. And
mhm,
it's nice though, because some of the stories I did hear of were really dedicated staff members, which I feel like
mhm,
you had to have those to be able to work there and to be able to continue to produce some type of normalcy or some type of affection for these kids and these grown adults. So
mhm.
we mostly focused on like the awful stories that probably led to a
Right.
lot of these hauntings. But we do want to say, like, not every single person that worked at Pennhurst was abusing the residents.
No. And in contrast to the tragic stories, there are largely untold stories of the deep comparison and great character evidence in some of Pennhurst's staff members. One recalls how she and others would volunteer their time on Saturday and Sundays to clean the residence. Many of them who could not toilet without assistance because the state's budget didn't allocate for weekend housekeeping services. Another staff shared that she would spend holidays there since most residents had families that had long stopped visiting.
I It makes me think of the residential treatment facility that I worked in, right out in bushy-tailed, out of counseling school, right out
Mm.
of graduate school, and I was like, "I'm gonna change the world."
Mhm.
And I go to this residential treatment facility with boys and girls that had been human trafficked. There was a sex
Oh.
offender unit. Mostly who I worked with were the girls that had been human trafficked and boys that had gotten mixed up in the gang life.
Mhm.
And those were my residents for like probably the 5 years I worked there.
Oh, wow.
And I would go and pick up an extra shift, got paid, but I would pick up an extra shift on the weekends because they ate there, they lived there, they sleep, breathe treatment 3 times a day. And
Mhm.
I remember like coming to the facility on Christmas in my Christmas jammies, like my
Oh.
and I just had like little treat bags for all of them because I wasn't going home to my family in Pennsylvania when I lived in Colorado. And
Mhm.
I didn't really have anybody else to spend it with either. Like I had roommates who had families that were living in the
Right.
same town, and although I was usually invited to go those places, like I would go and kick it with the kids for
Mhm.
the holidays because their families didn't visit them a lot.
Yeah.
And they were
Aw.
so unruly and they couldn't exist out in society that I feel like it's kind of the same institutionalization that we're talking
Mhm.
about, where it's like, you know what, you're too much. I can't do this. And even though
Mhm.
this might be a last resort, you have to go. You can't be here
Mhm.
anymore. And it's kind of
Yeah.
like that out of sight, out of mind. It's like, okay, well, now
Mhm.
we've forgotten about you, but other people can't because they're
Mhm.
living there with them day to day to day. And it was not a great facility to be a part of. And I witnessed a lot of stuff that I would have rather not. So
Mhm.
I'm glad I don't
I
work there
can't
anymore, but
imagine.
I can understand like even in like 2014 to like 2018, like I was in an institution that was kind of like this and still had similar things happening to it.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. Where I used to work, my old boss before he became into the whole dog sledding thing, he used to do security at a place for troubled kids, and they were young. And some of the stories he told me, I was just like, no wonder you have that like authority in you. Um, like
You
kids
had
pulling
to.
you had to, like, kids pulling each other's hair. He even told me, like, there was this one story where they would, I don't know why, but they would put, like, potted plants on a railing, and it was, like, clay pots, and he's like, one kid thought it was funny to just bomb them down on people, and then he's like, "After that, yeah, we're not gonna have these anymore," like, and it's like, "Why
Oh
would you have
no.
that?" But this was way back in the day, like, he's
Mm.
50 now, so
And everything's so restrictive. Like there's a sharps container and you have to be mindful of like how many colored
mhm,
pencils that you give an individual, and you have to have staff counts for every item or supply that you have, because it's kind of like kid jail. Like
mhm,
they would make their own weapons. Like
mhm.
we were certified to physically restrain them. I've had numerous fights that I've had to break up. Like my head got like put through plexiglass once. Like I've been
Jeez.
like bitten, punched, like everything that you can
Yeah.
imagine, and it just really takes a toll on you. So even the people
Mhm,
that have the most golden of hearts, I think, still struggle in institutions like that because there's so many obstacles there. And
mhm,
just like at the institution that I was working at, the residents here at Pennhurst did find ways to prosper. One article had mentioned they lived lives of inner dignity and grace in an ammonia washed world designed to strip that dignity from them. And this was especially true of the individuals who made up this group called the Working Patient Group. Day in and day out, they proved their worth to themselves. Not that they had to prove their worth to themselves or
mhm,
anybody else, because they'd always been worthy, but they did prove their worth helping to take care of even their worst off peers by assisting the paid staff in nearly every aspect of life at Pennhurst. Even the most severely disabled found ways to assert their individuality and retain their humanity in the face of a system that dehumanized them in a million different ways. Many people who were told for years that they could not succeed beyond Pennhurst gates proved those professionals wrong, going on to live independent lives of worth and value in their communities long after the administrative building's great oaken doors slammed shut for the last time. Just as we remember the sadness, we also need to acknowledge these quiet triumphs of their human spirit.
mhm. Even the dedicated staff were unable to prevent the horrors that saturated decades of court documents suing Pennhurst for its abuse, which ultimately led to its closure. The most prevalent of cases being Halderman versus Pennhurst State School. The facts of that case concluded that no psychologists or counselors were on duty at night or over the weekend, letting residents suffer from emotional distress and crisis for days. Restraints were used as a means of control to offset the inadequate staffing. Restraints refer to either physical ones, like binding a person's hands or ankles in seclusion rooms, or chemical restraints, like tranquilizing medications, often by injection. The rate of IV drug use by professionals were extraordinarily high. One of the doctors had been very vocal about the use of tranquilizing drugs. His name was Dr. Jesse Fear. In the expose, Suffer the Little Children, he can be seen recounting a story of which a male resident named Ernie called the doctor an explicit at some point in the morning, and he returned to his office where he brewed for hours, plotting his revenge. He asked the staff for the most painful injection, and later that night, he would find this resident in his bed, hold him down, and strike him with the needle, injecting a painful sedative. Later, he gloated, and I quote, he really hit the ceiling over that, meaning it was excruciating. What a dill hole.
I really think that, like, in this time, right? They had a philosophy in Germany that got
Mhm.
brought over to the States, and that this is what it
Right.
was: isolation, seclusion. It was pretty much like eugenics. They wanted to
Mhm.
exterminate intellectually and physically disabled people.
Mhm.
And I think that Dr. Fear was one of those prominent members of the staff that really believed that was true, because he
Yeah.
was recounting, I think it was for trial, like when they were going to trial and he was being interviewed. I don't think he was interviewed for Suffer the Little Children. I think that like
No.
he was later interviewed with like the trial, and then parts of that made it into the expose, as well
Oh.
as Bill Baldini asking him, oh, what was it like here? Oh, well, you did this and you did that. Like there was
Mhm.
so much information that came from not only all of those public cases, but from that documentary.
Mhm.
He also, though, would put people that had higher IQs that were seemingly, quote,
Oh.
normal with patients that had really low IQs as this form of punishment, which often meant that those lower IQ residents may like beat them or surprise them. Sometimes they were really self-destructive too. And he
Mhm.
would do it to scare the living shit out of those higher IQ individuals so they would further comply with the staff and doctors, because it was
Mhm.
easier to make them comply than it was to make the ones with lower IQs comply. He was actually suspended for 30 days without pay for the continued force of cooperation via drug use. And
Mhm.
I learned that he died at age 90 in Florida in 2001, but his body is buried in a cemetery 2 hours from Pennhurst.
Just to be like, "Hey, you're not forever forgotten from this place."
Yeah, it's like you spent so many years when you were living in another state. I mean, I don't know, maybe you wanted to be like buried near family or like where he was like grew up or something like that. But I just think that
Mhm.
like it's so ironic that his resting days aren't really that far from all of the people that he tormented over and over and over again.
Mhm. And it also sounds very, like, military, the way things were done, which is just, like, experimental, and there have been experiments on military people as well, and that's a whole other
Oh
ball
yeah, but
game
they did
there.
that to them here. You
Mhm.
know, they when I think it was like the flu and hepatitis, they were trying to
Right.
find cures for it, or whatever it was that they were trying at the time. And the
Mhm.
residents at Pennhurst, because of these really unsanitary conditions that we're about to get into, they were the perfect quote guinea pigs to be able to
Mhm.
do this, to be able to test what chemicals that they could use to treat a bunch of diseases, and
Mhm.
most notably hepatitis and the flu.
Yeah.
And if
Oh,
that wasn't
jeez.
horrific enough, residents were housed in the most, again, unsanitary of conditions. Excrement and urine soaked the living area floors, and outbreaks of pinworms and infectious disease were common. Many residents who have had verbal or toileting skills prior to admission, or those that acquired them during their stay, often lost those skills very quickly because the conditions prohibited them from actually using them. The noise level at Pennhurst was so high that many residents simply stopped speaking. This happened to the
Mm.
main plaintiff of this case, Terry Lee Halderman versus Pennhurst State School.
Mhm.
She knew 5 words before entering Pennhurst and left without the ability to speak. And her medical records consisted of 40 reported injuries. Now, I'll say reported. So
Mhm.
imagine how many injuries she actually sustained that were never
Right.
reported.
Yeah.
The notion of a person's volition in connection with admission, as well as in connection with the right to leave, was an illusionary concept at Pennhurst. They could not leave. They were barely able to consent to get in there. And
Mhm.
few, if any, residents now have, nor did at the time of their admission, have any adequate alternative to institutionalization. So, as a practical matter, Pennhurst was the only alternative. And nearly all the parents of Pennhurst residents who testified, at least, stated that they placed their children in Pennhurst only as a last resort. And had there been community facilities or community aid programs, their children would have never been placed at Pennhurst. And from the mouths of the parents that like came
Mhm.
back to visit and really cared about the experience that their kids were having. Some of them didn't have loving parents like that who
Mhm.
came back to visit. I was reading one example where a woman had lived states away, but her estate was also ill equipped. So she moved her child to Pennhurst, admitted him there, and then went back to her other state. And because of like long winters in the
Mhm.
Northeast, she didn't have any way of making it back to Pennhurst. And so when the weather had died down and she got enough for like a train ticket and whatnot, she was like, I'm going to go visit my child, who was also nonverbal. So for anybody out there who's listening is like, oh, why didn't they just call? Most of these people didn't have verbal capabilities. Some
Mhm.
did, especially the ones that probably weren't appropriate to be there, had a lot of verbal capacity that they
Mhm.
eventually
Yeah.
lost. But a lot of people didn't. So that's why there were not a lot of phone calls. There were more visitations. So she drove 4 hours, or rather rode a train for 4 hours, got to Pennhurst, was made to wait 3.5 hours. And then the staff
Um,
came out and told her that 10 months earlier, her son had died. They never notified her, and she couldn't even claim his body because they donated it to medical research without her consent.
like, what the frick? Like, when you told me that story, I was like, are you like, my jaw hit the floor. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me?
Mhm.
Like, 10 months. And then, like, oh, by the way, we donated his body. Like, how do you react to that? Like,
I don't even know what she did after that, but if she went and wanted to like burn the place down, I'd be like, "Girl, I'm
yeah, man.
throwing something down with you." Because
Yeah.
how one, I don't know this case, I don't know her, I don't know the patient, I don't know anything, but at the same
Mhm.
time, like 10 months is a really long time not to visit your kid. I
Mhm.
understand back in like earlier days that probably was very hard. It's not like you can just get in your car and go down the street now.
Yeah.
And I get that and I want to acknowledge it. And at the same time, what did you think for the last 10 months? Like, did you just think about your child lovingly every day and think, oh my God, I hope that he is getting the best care possible. I can't wait to see him as soon as I get out of here. And then you
Mhm.
get there and you learn your child has died and you never even got to see him again. You never got to have a proper
Yeah.
burial or a funeral or even like, I mean, this is gonna sound morbid, but like I think I could call to all the moms out there, like hug his body just
Mhm.
as like this one last time of them being together. She never even got that. And he
No.
never got it either. Who knows the circumstances surrounding his death because there were so
Mhm.
many very odd reports of people getting severely injured through not so serious means. Oh, they slipped and fell in the shower and hit his face on the faucet, but they removed his eyeball.
Yeah. Like, and it's very strange to me, like, they didn't contact her. Like, just like, "Oh, just to let you know," or, like, even before if he was, like, I don't know, maybe he was showing signs of illness, but, like, shouldn't staff be calling, like, the parents to be like, just, like,
100%.
just a reminder, like a reminder phone call, just an upkeep, just an update, like, "Hey, this is," like, and even if the parent who did drop that child off didn't care, they should, I know there was a lot of freaking people there, and to go through the list of, like, phone call reminders, I could only imagine, but at the same time,
They couldn't even take these kids to piss by themselves, let alone call
yeah.
a parent and say, "Hey, by the way, this is how Johnny's
Mhm.
doing at Pennhurst."
Yeah, and I remember in that Suffer the Children, they literally said there was only 2 staff, like, helping, like, a certain amount of people, and it's just it takes a freaking toll on you, like,
And
from a
it's like
staffing perspective.
right, and you can't do everything. Like, you
No.
can't be in every floor on every building for 3,000 people when
Mm-mm.
they weren't even supposed to have any more than, like, a 1,000, I think it was, like and they
Yeah.
had 40 buildings at this time. 40
Mhm.
buildings that were spread throughout this entire massive campus, and 20 of those buildings are gone.
Mhm.
They have been knocked down, they've been burned down, um, because of all of the decay. And to have such a huge camp, you're not walking from building 1 to building 40 to
Mm-mm.
help them either. And so each building had their own staffing issue, and each building suffered so many atrocious things. And the more that I think about like them not calling a family to pick up a dead loved one,
Mhm.
they did have this philosophy from Germany, which was also this was also happening all over the United States and all
Oh,
over the
yeah.
world to some degree. And
Mhm.
Pennhurst was just like one of the very first ones to do it on the scale in which it was done.
Mhm.
And so I wonder though, like, this is like decades before Hitler took over Germany and all of the other European countries and were trying to exterminate the Jews.
Mhm.
And we were doing it in America before Hitler did it. But we don't talk about that.
No.
That's
We
not
just
something I've ever learned in a history book, but I sure as
no.
hell spent all of 8th grade reading about the Holocaust.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that gets brushed under the rug, and we only remember the big, big bad. And a lot of people ask, why do we want to remember places like this or historical events that happened if they're so tragic and awful? It's because it keeps it relevant. Memory is the critical language and the terrain of human rights. By preserving the past in its original form, not the form we romanticize and glamorize, these places bear the mark of this pain to inspire powerful movements, to invest in more ways to prevent a future where this happens again.
I
Like,
was at Dachau,
mhm,
and it's concentration camp during the Holocaust, and there was a group of military individuals, and they had it was like their own tour. Like they were the only group of individuals in that tour, and I was with my own group, and I had asked our tour guide, I said, do you have like groups like them that come a lot? And he was like, oh no, he was like, that's a special group that we run because every single new group that comes into any installation in our military has to come here and learn about the history because
mhm.
we will prevent this from ever happening ever again.
Yeah, that makes
That's
the
a
most sense.
requirement.
Yeah, and yeah, I agree with that as well. Like, if you don't know you're going into the military, you don't know that kind of stuff, you should, really.
Mhm, and even if you've heard the stories, even if you had it in your education and
Mhm,
your primary school and secondary school and whatnot, you should still go there, especially, like, if you live there.
mhm,
It is a hop, skip, and a jumps bus ride to go to any historical place and learn about it, and I'm
mhm,
glad that they make them do that, and I wish that, at least in the United States, I wish that we learned more about the horrors that actually happened rather than the stories that we think are true. It kind of reminds me of children's books
mhm,
when we read children's stories and we're like, "Oh, that's so great and this is a happy story." And then you
mhm,
actually know the original story that it came from that was really dark and really twisted,
mhm,
and we just take it and change it. And I think at least in the United States, we did that with our actual history. There are some
yeah,
people that don't even know, including me, about the boarding schools that we forced Native Americans into and killed them and scalped them and stripped them of their dignities and forced them to assimilate into white culture. We
mhm,
don't I didn't learn about that until I was 26, and it was because I worked at that
yeah,
treatment facility, and we had a very specific program for tribal kids, like
mhm,
kids who still lived on the reservation, to come for treatment. And the program director of that specialized program said, all of the staff here, you're watching this. And she made us watch a part of our training, like a yearly training. She made us watch this documentary. And
mhm,
I was just as physically ill during that as I was when I watched Suffer the Little Children. And I'm like,
mhm.
why am I only learning this as a 26-year-old person? And it's like, why am I only learning this about people with disabilities and how we treated them as a 33-year-old woman?
Right? I feel like as we grow as a society, like each year, each decade that goes by, we are getting a little too sensitive. And I hate to say it, but COVID really picked it up a like the tenfold, really. Like I remember back in the day when people were learning how to drive, you had to watch a video and you would see car accidents and you would see the result of car accidents. I never got that. it was more of a, oh, we're going to learn how to drive. And then even in health class, you saw photos of what you didn't want to see, what type of illness you could get from sex ed and all that. And then when I went to high school, we didn't get those photos, but our parents' generation did. And it's like each generation that goes by, we're just slowly removing what we think is like, ooh, like we're just slapping a band-aid on people now. And it's just like, oh, maybe you shouldn't see this, but or hear about it, but you need to know this stuff. And I've always said, in anything, even in my work, you learn from other people's mistakes. You don't learn from people who make the gold stars. If you make a mistake, you know not to do it. And I always find the underdogs who slowly dig their way up out of the ground, like you have to figure it out on your own and you have to hear these stories, because if I couldn't imagine going through life and not knowing this stuff, like even
Mhm.
what's going on in Canada now, like we just started finding out about what was going on with the schools with Native Americans and bodies being hidden. And I'm not going to get all into it, but like now we're just realizing this. And it's just like,
Mhm.
guys, like, come on.
Well, and I remember back in high school,
Oh,
we did the same things that you were saying that like you didn't get to do when you were in high school.
mhm.
We had an inmate from the jail who was serving like 25 years in prison come to talk to us because drank, drove, and killed his best friend. And he was there
Wow.
being like, this is my life now. And they even had him give his like speech and stuff in his orange jumpsuit.
Really? I
And
wish we had stuff
also,
like that. Like,
we
scare the
did
shit out of the kids.
yeah, and we did, like, a demonstration in the parking lot where
What?
we had, like, for drunk driving, like, awareness month and, like, driver's ed and whatnot, we
Mhm,
had, like, a demoed car, and you had actors, and we, like, gave them all this really bloody makeup, and we put them in as if we were all responding to a car accident, and my
mhm,
whole grade was standing outside of this car watching it, and we had, like, the local EMS department and all this kinda stuff, like, come and do it, and it was like a live reenactment of what they would see if someone, like, got drunk, drove, hit somebody, and like there were
mhm.
people dead. They performed like fake CPR, and it was
Oh,
like
wow.
very like emotionally productive.
Very
And it was
eye-opening.
110%. And we watched some crazy shit in sex ed. So not that we got like the best education, but I do think that like those moments, like we needed to read about that. We needed to see
Mhm,
it firsthand. And I really wish that we had this type because the information is out there on Google. I can
mhm,
find it and I can read it now. And it's like, I want to make sure that, like, when my kid grows up and is of age to understand these things, that he gets
mhm,
the real truth and the real version about how certain things came to be. And if all of you also have heard us today and you're like, what more is to this? I want to know more. I am intrigued
mhm,
to know like what's really happened because it's definitely not what I've experienced. So you can head over to Pennhurst Memorial and Preservation Alliance's website. It's at preservepennhurst.org to learn more. Many stories in the actual language that we use today in the construction of our episode can be found there. So I want
mhm,
to give a lot of the respect to the alliance and what they do and their mission to have
mhm,
other people understand what really happened because it's totally affected our lives. There's no way we'll be the same after knowing this and having been there. So I
mhm,
really do want to acknowledge that. And as we conclude the history portion, we are going to get onto the haunted accounts, but I do want everybody at some point in time in this episode or after it to kind of just like take your moment of peace to
mhm,
reflect on what you've heard and be thankful for wherever you're at in life that
mhm.
you were not a part of the paragraphs that we just read.
Yes, 100%. There's always something to be grateful for.
And everybody knows that Pennhurst is the hotbed of paranormal activity. How could it not be?
Mhm,
Some people even say that like the tunnel system that governs the only real way to get to all the buildings pretty seamlessly is the reason why every square inch of the campus is haunted. And in the largest building on campus of 100,000 square feet is the former patient dormitory, the Devon building. Growls and screams are heard here. Tanner even says the darkness overwhelms you when you step foot on this campus. And in the
Mhm.
Mayflower building, you can hear bloody, you could have screamed bloody murder, but no one could even hear you.
Mhm. And in the basement of the Mayflower building, a malevolent, aggressive male spirit of a former maintenance man named King is said to haunt the boiler room. EVPs are usually captured here as well as pushing, scratching, and pulling of hair. King is said to attack the biggest guy in the group, showing his dominance. A former patient named Emily, she also lived in a room there as well. She is reported to be playful with visitors, appearing as a full bodied apparition, and numerous digital recorder sessions capture EVPs of her saying, I love you. On the third floor, alpha males experience physical sickness or being pushed down or up the stairs. Previous investigators warned the team you better have a backup plan and access to reach someone quickly.
And as we know, they don't. They're spread across campus and their walkies sometimes suck. So, or spirits at least manipulate them enough to say, like, you're not going to talk to each other right now.
Yeah, and it's a no go, guys.
One extreme report was that one of those alpha males was seen levitating off the floor as a dark
Mhm.
spirit appeared to be choking him. He was so overwhelmed that he had to be carried out of the building.
Yeah, and like, didn't that guy say the guy who was levitating was like 6 foot, like 4 or something, and like 240 pounds?
Yeah, like big ass dude.
Big dude. Like, what the frig?
And I always wonder too, like, I know that it's for television, and I know
Mhm,
Dakota finds out all of the information, writes the packet, and everybody reads it, at least in
mhm,
season one. And I wonder, like, do they know as much as like do they know what we've like presented and what we found? Like, did they dig as deep? Did they like just want to focus on certain things? Like, I wonder how much knowledge that the team really has
mhm,
going into it, because I mean, at least for Dakota, right? Because he's the one researching it. But
mhm.
the team only gets a really small snapshot of what
Yeah.
the actual history is. But they even know, with the limited information that they have, that Pennhurst is their final spot because they needed the previous 9 locations to be
Mhm,
able to prepare to go back, at least go back for Tanner and Dakota, and to get there for the first time for Alex and Chelsea.
mhm. Yeah, and for Dakota and Tanner, it's been 4 years since Trail to Terror. We all know Chelsea tapped out before she can even go to this location. So Pennhurst was the final stop before they needed as much experience as they could before going back to this location. They discuss parts of this road trip and what they've noticed. And while they're in their RV, we always love a little conversation. And Chelsea notices how each of them react to fear differently. She says that Tanner goes into protector mode and he stands up to what is going on. So every time we see an episode, he's always like, who's there? What's going on?
He does, is like he gets like a big, like, you know how when you meet
Puffs his chest out.
a bear in like the
Yeah.
wild, at least like one kind of bear, okay, please don't run from the other one. And I'm not gonna say black or brown because I'd have to Google it to figure out which one it is. So
Grizzly.
I was gonna say, I hope I ever never meet a bear in the wild, because I might like go, ah, and make myself really big and like to scare it, and it's gonna be the one that comes and charges after me to eat me.
Mm-mm.
But it's like that's what he does. He gets like bigger and like
Mhm.
puffs out his chest, and he's like trying to assert
He
his
goes
own.
Minnesota wild.
I love it. He does though. And it's like, I'm gonna get you before you get me.
Mhm. Yeah, 100%. Um, I love how Dakota admits this though, and he's like, "I just say, no, shut up," and denying that whatever's happening, even though he like asks it to do something, and then he's just like, "Stop!" Like
He's
every
like,
time.
I remember, like, I don't even remember what episode it is, but he, like, lays down on his little, like, cot thing, and he's like, "Okay, whatever's here, don't come near me." And then, like, 2 minutes later, he's like, "Can you make a noise? Can you make yourself known?" And I'm like, "What do you
I
want
think
them to do, bud?" Like,
that's, like, in the bowling alley. He's, like,
oh,
lying
yeah.
down or something, he's like, "Get away from me."
"Don't come in here. I'm in your
"Don't come
space
in here."
sleeping, but don't come in here."
And then, Chelsea states that Alex tries to make the most logical conclusions happen. He is still a bit of a skeptic at this point, so he is always just like, "Okay, how, who, what, where, when, why," kinda
And it
thing.
makes sense, right? He's
Yeah.
like, if he's still trying to figure out, like, what he really believes even half after having all of these experiences, he's probably gonna
Mhm.
wanna do that.
Yeah, for sure. And, Chelsea, she admits it. She just screams. She screams, and that makes everyone scared. And the guys say, like, once she screams, it just amplifies
Oh, game
everything.
over.
It's game over for
Mhm.
sure.
And I think that, like, so and it's so funny because when they are having their good conversations like this in the RV, something
Mhm.
always comes up that makes us kinda, like, really laugh at it. And a
Mhm.
couple weeks ago, maybe even been, like, a month or 2 ago, but we're in the Fear Club, and Chelsea actually posted or, like, said in a live or something like, "What like, tell me what are some things that you thought were one way, and then you figured out that it was actually something totally different." And in
Mhm.
this episode, she said the same thing that, like, she thought that the phrase "the coast is clear"
Oh,
is "the ghost is clear." And instead of, like, the bearer of bad news, she thought it was the bear of bad news. And
fair
she's just,
enough.
like, learning these things as she goes, and I think it's so funny that she brings those up, like, at that time because 'cause they're all talking about, like, how they respond to fear and, like, what they all notice, and they're all getting a little bit more introspective, and then she's like, "Hey, guys, did you know that"
So we all have moments. We all think something is something
I
else, and
didn't
then we're like,
even
"Oh,
think, though, like, when she was, like, posting about that, I was like, "That was so random." Like, what is she doing? And I was like, "Oh." And she, like I think she, like, posted about it, and then she talked about it on a live or something, like, how she thought, like, it was the
maybe."
ghost is clear and bearer of bad news or something, and, I was like, "Why have I heard that before?" Now I know it was in this episode.
Mhm. This episode, and then they kinda mix it up a bit with the packet read. They get to, a bonfire at a camp called Brandywine Creek Camp
I
to
wanna
read
go
the
there.
packet.
It sounds
Brandywine. I
mhm.
wonder if they serve brandy and wine.
I don't know, they wouldn't even had a bonfire if, Tanner didn't take over and was like, "Guys, watch. Let me do
Honestly,
this."
when I was rewatching it earlier, I'm just like, I wonder if, like, anyone else knows how to do that. Like, what if he wasn't like, take him out of the equation, and it's just like, what would you do?
Yeah, they went out he's like, "I like the Lincoln Log approach, guys." He was
Yeah.
like, "You know how you approach a toddler and, like, tell them something in the most basic of terms so that they know what
Mhm,
you're about to do?" But, like,
mhm.
you really just wanna be like, "Dude, how do you not know how to do this?" You know? It's like, "Oh, let me help you put your toothpaste on your toothbrush even though I've seen you do it 900 times." It's kinda like how Tanner approaching them being like, "Well, this one's called the Lincoln Law, and you arrange them." And they
Oh
even
my
say
god.
too, they're
I
like,
would have no
"Thanks, Tanner."
idea.
Like, we wouldn't have had a
I would have
fire.
no
Well,
idea.
my camp counselor days, I feel
Oh, so,
like
like, was he a Boy Scout at some point?
fire
Like
guru or something over here.
yeah.
Well, at least I try. I'm always, like, poking it and, like, messing in the fire, but I thought that that was so funny when he's like, "Guys, we'll just try this way." So they do end up getting their little fire going so they could have an
Mhm.
appropriate packet read.
Yes, setting the mood, but, setting the mood and they're anxious to find out. They want to know now, and Tanner knows Dakota. He knows that everything they've been put through so far to get them ready for this location. And, Tanner's face when he opens it, he physically moves away.
Dude, his just, like it was so weird. I don't know why that I always, like, think about body language whenever I see it. I don't know if it's just because I use it, like, every day in my job or
Mhm,
something, but I've never seen him react like that. Even when they went, this is in season 2, but even when they went to Hillview Manor, like,
mhm.
both of them react, but they just stay, like, straight on. They look at Dakota every time. Even if they have like a huge like reaction or something, they don't actually like get up and leave or something. And he turns away. He like folds his body in half and his hands are like in his
Mhm.
head. And he's even saying, like, I've had nightmares for months straight after
Mhm.
the last time they were at this location 4 years ago. And he's like, you know what? We're going to be tested spiritually, mentally, physically, in every way that we could be tested. No wonder Dakota left this for last.
Mhm. And Chelsea says they have to have the utmost respect for what happened there. So we do have to respect, especially nowadays, going back to locations, and you have to remember the history. Yes, it is fun to go ghost hunting and getting all this stuff, but people lived through this at this location. So we do have to respect what goes on there and what happened there and the spirits that are still there.
And I had been reading that there's like an outrage from parts of the community about Pennhurst holding a haunted attraction there. Not that they allow ghost hunts, but that they
Mhm.
turned one of the buildings, I think it's the
Mm.
assembly hall, into a haunted house because they were like,
Okay.
you know what? That's just like
Ooh, yeah.
exploitive. You know, it's
Yeah.
like you can come here so that you can like learn about the history and you can ghost hunt because like they're probably getting much more um contact than they did when they were in like their lives,
Yeah.
like when they were alive versus now. But there's like an outrage about them having a haunted house there, which like I actually like kind of get, I guess.
I
Like
get
now that
that.
like knowing these things and like I've been at haunted places for haunted attractions. Like I had talked, I think it was 2 episodes from Moundsville. You know,
Mhm.
I was there for the haunted house in the prison. Now, I don't necessarily know. I
Mhm.
mean, they were in the South Hall, which I know that like people were housed and we do know that, and like
Right.
that was also horrific. And I don't know if it's just because I didn't make the connection at that point in time. And I know that some people are probably being like, oh well, they're inmates, like who cares, like they were awful
Mm,
people and whatnot. And you know what, sure, but they were still also human beings, and they
yeah.
suffered a lot of like abuse and torment and things that they
Mhm.
shouldn't have either. So now even like going back to it, like just knowing that I was there in like October, I was like kind of thinking, I'm like, would I do that again? You know, would I
Yeah.
do something like that? Like maybe a tour or a ghost hunt, sure, but like would I really do some sort of like entertainment? Like, because that the history
Yeah.
is not for our entertainment.
No, for sure, and it's different, like, sorry, everyone, disclaimer. I'm gonna talk about Ghost Adventures. Uh, there's that one episode, where they go to a haunted house. I forget what it's called, and it's actually haunted.
In
And that's
Utah, the is that like Tooele or something?
Tululi or something? Yeah, I
Yeah.
forget what it's called. There's 666 or something. Like, I forget. There was like a whole I think it's a Halloween episode. I can't remember. Um, but it's different if it's already a haunted attraction that
Yeah.
is haunted. Then it's fair game. But when it's like a historical place and it's not meant to be a haunted attraction, it just happens to be haunted, I don't think we should make it a haunted attraction because then it becomes like a money thing, like it's just like a money grab at that point.
Hmm.
Um and
And you
that's why
lose the respect for the place.
yeah, for sure. Like I don't think like Paracon has is anything like that. Like everyone's super respectful of the location and staff members as well. Um, and just being able to go there just like changes your perspective on things. But to do like a whole haunted house thing to like purposely scare you,
Yeah,
I
I
don't
think it
know.
just kind of like takes away from what they're actually trying to do there. And
Mhm.
without like setting foot there, right? Like just knowing their limited history, I do think that they end up getting a bigger perspective because they're in the RV and they're heading to meet with Jean, who is a woman who had been institutionalized herself,
Mhm.
although not at Pennhurst, but something very similar. She's actually a co founder of the Pennhurst Memorial Alliance, which is the organization whose mission is to provide a voice for those who didn't have one and promote an understanding of the struggle for dignity and full civil rights for persons with disabilities. She actually shares her story, and hers were really similar to the accounts that we discussed already. She was
Mhm.
forced to comply with staff's demands. And if she didn't, she'd be restrained. She had her arms tied behind her back until the blood would just stop flowing. And she kind of felt forgotten and she never really wanted to go through it again. And after she had been discharged from her institution, she fought really hard to get Pennhurst closed. And she thinks that, like, her story, among many others, right, were very integral in getting it shut down.
Mhm. And, like, watching that, I kinda got a little emotional as well, and you can see Chelsea also get emotional just to see, like, someone who has been in something like a place like that. There's absolutely no pun intended, but in an insane place. Like, it really is, like, insane that these places existed, let alone to have zoos with large, wild, exotic animals be taken better care of, which is also discussed in Suffer the Children as well.
Oh my god, I was also reading that in, I can't remember what year it was, so forgive me, but
Mhm.
when they looked at the state's budget that the governor had approved, they needed $4 million,
Right.
which would be like $8.8 million in like 2022. So
Oh,
probably like
wow, I
maybe
was
$10
thinking
million
about that.
in 2024. So they needed that
Holy.
amount of money to get even up to like adequacy, not to like perform well. It was like just to get up to adequacy, because sometimes like the state would even skip doing some buildings. They had two buildings that they were allowed in. They weren't allowed in all 40 buildings, because if they were, they would have shut them down right then and there, because they didn't
Oh,
even meet
right.
basic standards for
Mhm.
care. So knowing that, like, they needed that money, they didn't get it, but the zoo in Philadelphia got more money than Pennhurst did
Mhm.
in the same year. So they actually, like, I know everyone had even said, like, oh, I wouldn't put my dog there for the weekend, or like,
Mhm.
animals in the zoo get better care of this. It
Mhm.
was That wasn't a hyperbole. It actually happened.
Yeah.
Animals at the zoo had more money to fund their stays than these residents did at Pennhurst.
And to think about it, like, these aren't sanctuaries. Like, these aren't places where we're putting animals that need help. This is a zoo, and it's wild, exotic animals. Like, in Suffer the Children, I think they're showing, like, jaguars, and for an animal like that, you need it to be shipped, and that's gonna be a cost. So you're spending money to get these animals there, and now you're spending more money to take care of these animals. And I know, like, where I used to work, it was just not as big as a thing, but, like, taking care of, like, 200 animals, it's freaking hard. So I couldn't even imagine taking care of, like, 10,500 patients, let alone two people only taking care of 3,000. Like, from a worker's perspective, taking care of another physical being and being the only person on site, like, sometimes I was by myself for 8 hours and I had to take care of 200 animals, and there is a time schedule and you got to get shit done. And it's hard. It's physically and mentally, like, hard on
Oh, it's
you, and
exhausting.
it's so draining. And I can understand why some things get forgotten about, and there are certain priorities that need to be met, and but, like, being understaffed can take a huge freaking toll on you, man. Like, more work is added on to you, especially, like, by yourself. Like, there's higher expectations, and yeah, like, not like my last job was anything like Pennhurst, but just, like, from an experience and a perspective, like, a girl that I worked with at that job, she did work at a zoo back in Ontario, and she did tell me stories. Like, it's freaking hard. She took care of lions, she took care of rhinos, giraffes. Like, it's just like some of the stuff she saw, like, I hate to say it, but it was not good where she worked. And again, understaffed, underpaid, and things start to fall out of place at stuff like that. And unfortunately, Pennhurst was one of those places.
Yeah, and even though, like, you had so many dedicated people,
Mhm.
even if you had like 50 dedicated workers, they can't save 10,000 people. They can't
Mm-mm.
save 2,000 people. Like, you could only really do your job, and that's it. Like, you could do as much as you could volunteer on the weekends, you could come on
Mhm.
holidays, and although that is definitely appreciated, I'm sure, and did make a difference, it's, like, making it 1% better. And I'm
Yeah.
sure for them, like, thank God, right, that they were making it even 1% better because they deserved a whole lot more than that. And at
Mhm.
the end of the day, too, it still sucks because they could have tried their hardest and it still didn't make as much of a difference as they wanted it to. And I think that
Mm-mm.
that place really holds that there,
Mhm.
knowing that it could have been so much different, but it wasn't.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think when they pull up to this place in the RV, Tanner even says, like, "I'm getting sick. I have a knot in my stomach. Like, I'm really nervous." And he's starting to remember, like, all the nightmares that he's had from this
Mhm.
place. And Chelsea, seeing it for the very first time, immediately says, like, I don't want to do this. I don't even want to get out of the RV.
Mhm.
She's like super uneasy at that point in time. And I think she's probably which makes more sense. I think they all have empathy, but I think Chelsea being like the only woman too, like she has a
Yeah.
little bit more of it, and I think that she shows it a lot more often than the rest of them. Although I think they all do a really great job of giving these locations the space that it deserves to be held for what happened there.
Mhm.
Um, but they have to hit the ground running as soon as they get out because
Oh,
there's
for
too
sure.
much to see.
Yeah, there is too many buildings and too much space to see. And I think Dakota also wanted to explore other places that he hadn't been before. So they set up their gear room in the Mayflower building where Tanner and Dakota were there 4 years ago. They see the tunnels and recount the heinous acts that were committed there. They head up to the second floor and then the third, and Dakota asks, "Is anyone up here and can you make a noise?" Then two noises, a bang and like something sounds like it's almost getting like thrown.
Hmm.
When they follow the noise, he pans around and you can see the bathroom where if you go and watch our video at Paracon, that is the bathroom that we ended up doing an Estes method in. For some reason I got pukey in there and I got really drawn to the tub. I'm a bathtub kind of girl. So I was like, "Ooh, look, a tub." And then I felt
Well, and it's
pukey.
weird because it's the only one. Like, when you walk into the big
Mhm.
bathroom, there's, like, couple, like, what would have been stalls, that mirror, and, like, a sink, and then there's, like, some standalone showers, but then the one that you were really drawn to was kind of, like, halfway enclosed and had, like, a
Mhm.
little bench, kinda like if you go to the gym and you're, like, showering at the gym, and it's, like,
Yeah.
this little bench, and then there's, like, some sort of, like, wash station.
Mhm.
Um, you were sitting on that bench, and, like, the tub was kinda right there. You had the
Yeah.
Spirit app on your lap on your phone, but you were also doing the
Mhm.
SS method, so you were connected to the Spirit box, which is a
Mhm.
device that scans radio frequencies that said that spirits can use that energy to come through, and you can hear their actual voices speaking to you. And I'm filming you while this time
Mhm.
is happening. And you watch a lot of Twin Paranormal where they rely on the Spirit app.
Mhm.
And I have used it once, and I think that was at Ohio State Reformatory, and I was getting just like off the wall shit. So part of me is kind of like skeptical
Mhm.
about that time as well. And
Yeah.
people, we are still like connecting dots from the evidence that we got 3 weeks
Yeah.
ago at
Mhm.
Pennhurst to right now, because I don't know what came up before the word that we're about to talk about, and we're going to talk about how
Mhm.
it just like blew our minds, the information that we found out. But you were saying that the other day that the spirit box gives you words sometimes, but it doesn't actually say, or the spirit app gives you
Mhm.
words sometimes, and then it that are not said, but then like gives you a word that is said out loud. So what were
Yes.
you like reading during that time when we were in there?
So, I know like Twin Paranormal and the Paranormal Files use the Spirit app a lot, and Tanner like kind of like stated that like he was kind of a skeptic about it as well. I am iffy about it because it is on your phone. I've tried using it at my house and with all the electronic devices around, I don't trust it. But when Twin Paranormal, I think that when they went to the Queen Mary, Ryan states that they unplug everything. They unplug the lights, they unplug the like mini fridge, And then they also put it on airplane mode. So you don't have your Wi-Fi going, you put it on airplane mode so you have no distractions. And I find usually when they do that in a location, especially like Pennhurst, there's no electricity going around, you might get a better like sense of the place. And I had the spirit box going at the same time, and like we ended up getting a name, and then we also ended up getting, I think in the speaker box I had run or get
Mhm.
out, and then go also popped up, but it never said it out loud. So sometimes it won't say a word out loud, but usually when it does, I feel like if it's saying it out loud, it's like more of a
Something more to pay
presence.
attention to.
Yeah. So it said go, but then I looked down and it also said out loud gargoyles.
That was the
And
moment where I thought, "This app's a crock of shit." You know,
yeah.
like, why are we even like, I thought I had that in my brain. I was like, "Why are we even using this? Gargoyles?" I was
Mhm.
like, "There's not even a statue of a gargoyle, like, on the property." I was like, "This is dumb. Super
Mhm.
dumb." Like, when you heard it and when you saw it, like, did you just kind of dismiss it like I did? Or did
Yeah.
you think, like
I don't even think we even said anything. I think
hmm.
it is in our video, our special episode, and it says gargoyles, but we just completely ignore it. But
Had we
apparently
had this
we
information, we probably
should
would have,
have.
like, you know what I mean? Like, asked something a little bit more
Yeah.
about it. Because as I was doing my research, I came across this really awesome article. There was a former employee at Pennhurst, and he would draw the residents for them and then give them pictures of themselves.
Mhm.
And so he's telling all of these different stories, all the different residents that he's drawn, he's showing them. And then he literally mentions that some residents were referred to as gargoyles because they that word could only depict what their actual physical stature looked like. And he even
Mm.
drew a patient that they may have like called a gargoyle at that time. And
Mm.
it was like a very long face, a little bit emaciated, this kind of like hunchback too. And what did you think when I sent you that text message? Was like, bro, do you remember when this thing happened? And oh my God, guess what I just read about?
When you text me, I was literally at work on my laptop, and my jaw dropped, and I was literally like, "Stop!" Like there's no way. And things just started connecting and clicking, and like I don't know why, but like I remembered the word gargoyles because it was weird.
It was so out
And
there.
yeah, and I thought maybe like, oh, like statue, like something to do with statue, but there was nothing like that on the building or outside the building. There was no vendors that I recall that had anything to do with that. There was no props around with gargoyles. There's nothing.
No,
Nothing.
that's why I think
So,
it was so easy to dismiss because I was like, "Man, that doesn't have anything to do with what we're at. I'm not even going to
mhm,
pay attention to it."
mhm,
And I like purposely didn't say out loud what I was thinking because we were filming at that time too.
yeah.
And I didn't want to like bring attention to the thing that I thought was so strange because in the moment I was like, "Oh, this like this is like discrediting itself. Like the app is
Mhm.
discrediting itself by doing it." And little did we know that 3 weeks later, we would find out that that word has such a significance. And no one would know that unless you were a staff that worked there. You wouldn't have
Yeah.
known that they called patients that. And even more derogatory and degrading type language. So I can't even
Mhm.
imagine what else is out there that we don't know about. But that was I don't know, it was just wild. And while I was reading your notes,
Yeah.
we had the same note of like, "Oh my god, they pan," was as they're walking, and it's like, we were in that room, like, we
Yeah.
were there doing our own type of thing, and that's, like, where we
Yeah.
captured this word saying that, and so it's crazy that, like, the sounds that they heard during that time had
Mhm,
led them up that way, and then they end up
mhm,
going into this room, and they sit down, and it starts to storm, and it's like the thunder is brewing, you can kinda hear it, like, cracking in the distance, and
mhm.
Dakota even says, like, this place is going to be so charged up after this. And I never noticed it before, but like he pans down the hallway and you can see the lightning
Yes, you
lighting
can
up
see
in
it.
the window. And like even when I was watching it, it like just added to the scare factor.
And I'm just like, I have a photo of that hallway.
Right? Well, even when they were going through, like, a lot of different places, I was like, "Oh," and some of it is even
Mhm.
more decayed since they had the very
Yep.
first seasons than when we were there 3 weeks ago.
Mhm. Yeah, and I found it interesting because I had a few, like, feelings on the 2nd floor, but I completely forgot, like, a lot of the activity happens on the 3rd floor, and in that bathroom, we had some shuffling happen. We had a lot of voices coming through, and even with the gargoyle thing, like, we were trying to also connect the dots, and we had some sassy girl coming through, and I was just like, 'cause she says, like, "That girl," and I'm like, "Is she talking about the gargoyle?" Like, kinda thing, like,
Mm,
"Why are you in this room?" Like, type of thing. Because there was, like, what, 900 women at this
yeah.
facility?
And I
So,
think,
it
like,
could have
we
been
were
a
in
girl's
that building,
bathroom.
so it's like Emily has a room up there. We don't know what
Yeah.
Emily looks like. I'm not
Mhm,
sure, like, what that spirit looked like whenever she was alive, and I was even listening to another podcast about Pennhurst today, and they said that in those bathrooms that we were in, one would stand at one end of the room, one would have, like, a hose to spray them. They didn't even actually shower. They had a hose to spray them, and another one would just throw buckets of soap at them and they would wash them.
oh,
They would like just cleanse them off from head to toe. And they sometimes wouldn't even dry them before putting on their clothes and then sending them back to their rooms. So when we
jeez.
were in there, like, I wonder if like the shuffling that we heard was kind of like a line of patients just shuffling to get in there to get
Mhm,
hosed off and to get back out. Because even when you were under, no
mhm,
one else is in the room except for me and you. And
mhm,
when you're under, I'm constantly like looking
mhm.
back and looking back. And then I was like looking up because I thought I had like seen a shadow like move from behind me, like something
Mhm.
blocked out a light. And so I looked back and we heard that shuffling and we both kind of reacted to each other and we were like, who's in
What
here?
is that?
But then like 20 seconds later, a group from the hallway
Mhm.
does end up walking in, but we heard those sounds before they got there.
In there, like, there are people walking by the hallway, but you could tell, like, who was in the hallway, and then I kinda, like, there was a small little gap between, like, you and the wall, and I was like, "I haven't seen anyone go through," and then when I was watching back the footage, at one point, there's, like, an orb that kinda, like, hovers by my head near the bathtub,
Hmm.
and I was just like, "What the heck?" And then, like, someone was sitting right next to me, like, we had a lot going on.
I was like goosebumped up after that. Like that was a
Yeah.
room that was like no matter who else was even in the building, they were still just as active as if we would have been there by ourselves.
Mhm. And yeah, the group, it starts thunderstorming, they're in that room, and they start to hear talking in the hallway, and then, like, multiple voices, and then noises like people moving and shuffling also, back as if someone is about to come up on them. So there's something about that 3rd floor, and Tanner's heart is pounding. They think it came from the staircase, so they go and check it out. And before moving on, they place the good old music box
That
in the
creepy
hallway.
fucking thing.
I love it. Creepy music box in the hallway outside the room they were just in. Just as they're about to leave, the music box chimes. Chelsea thinks when they ask the spirits to do things like the music box that they're inviting something that they shouldn't. I think she's just a little nervous about the circumstances because it is thunderstorming, there's stuff happening, it is a big location. I don't think you're necessarily inviting things. I think when you
Mhm.
start toying with rituals, that
Right, or like
is more of an
Ouija board,
invitation.
like
Yeah.
seances. You're like
You're
opening the portals to the other world, like, "Hey,
mhm.
come here," and I
Yeah.
think the same thing, like, it's just a device that they can use to show you that they're there, and you're not necessarily, like, wanting to get into their world, they're just saying, "Hey, you're here, like, let us be known." But
Mhm.
I like how they like strategically place like static cams or like different devices at other spots because then they end up leaving, but they can still capture footage that's going on in that location. So they
Mhm.
actually head to the Devon building next, which is like really run down. There's water everywhere. There's so much graffiti.
But
And they're
first, when Dakota goes in the Devon building, like, I don't think anyone has been in there before, but when he
mhm.
opens it, my first thought was like, "I drank in there." Where they
You're like,
walk in,
this
I was
was
like,
the place.
"Oh, that's the place where I waited in line for booze. It's better upkeep now."
Right? It's all, like, very much, like I don't wanna say taken care of because it's not,
Mhm.
but I do think that,
Yeah.
like, some sort of like, some areas are definitely in way better
We
condition than
weren't
when they
walking through puddles of
probably
water.
yeah, and we weren't, like, kicking debris out of our
Yeah.
way as we were making our way, but, like, they kind of respond to the state of, like, disrepair that it's
Yeah, because
actually
Tanner's like,
in.
"Oh, this is gross," and I'm like, "Dude, we drank in there."
Yeah, and I'm glad that, like, they have been able to do what they could
Mhm.
in the places
Yep.
that they can, because there are some places where it's like, you can't touch it. You can't go up
Mm-mm.
there, you can't walk up there, you can't even
Mhm.
look there without it, like, looking like it's gonna fall down. And, like, they make their way onto, like, the first floor. Chelsea ends up
Mhm.
turning on the Ovilus, and it immediately says down, so they're like, "Hmm, let's go down to the basement." And
Yeah.
they realize well, they don't, but we realize they're in Candyland, which is where they're
Mhm.
at when they go back in the Project Fear episode, where Paranormal Files ends up coming and jumping along with them. I
Oh,
think
Colin.
Cullen sleeps there. No,
He
he like
snacks
has
and he
also
sleeps.
dinner. Yeah, I was gonna say he has dinner and he sleeps there as well. But it's in Candyland and it's said that way because there's a lot of patient art that is on the
Mhm.
wall and there's like a carousel, so it kind of gives off this like Candyland type vibe.
Yeah.
But as they continue to walk, they find the tunnels in the Devon building. Nothing really happens there. So they end up going back upstairs and they look like they're walking through this like maze of cubicles that we've also been
Mhm.
in, which if you watched
Mhm.
our episode, you can actually see it from what it was like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Um, and they're not like Dakota even says, like, oh, this like it feels like a maze. Like you're not even
Mhm.
able to see around the corner
Mhm.
when you're walking, so it kind of like increases the scare factor, and they end up hearing this really loud three-tone like whistle and then a
Mhm.
bang on the wall near Chelsea is, and Chelsea thinks that they're being taunted. And
Mhm.
honestly, she doesn't respond like she normally does. I mean, yes, she screams,
She
which is like
screams.
yeah, that's inevitable for her,
Mhm.
but she's much calmer than normal. Like Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary, she's running the opposite direction when she
Right.
hears a bang, but that bang happens where she is, not where the guys
Right
are.
next to her.
She's
Mhm.
standing right beside the wall that the bang occurs on, and she just stands there. I don't know if she's like kind of frozen or whatnot, but whatever it is, kudos to Chelsea
Yep.
because you came a long way in 10 stops than you had when we were at the beginning. And I know I said at the beginning of season 1 you were going to get a really bad rap, but you know what? By season 10, we're singing your or episode 10, we're singing your praises, and by Project Fear Billy Creek Village, where like you're a total fucking
Mhm.
badass. So
Yeah.
this is just kind of like the start, I think, of like her transformation. And
Mhm.
they end up separating into duos after this because the place is just so massive.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, yeah, no doubt. Like, I don't think they could do one episode doing the whole thing. So
Yeah.
we just kind of stick to two places. So we go into duos, and Chelsea and Alex are in the Mayflower building. And Chelsea and Alex hear the music box go off as soon as they get up those stairs. Alex says one chime for yes and two chimes for no. And then Alex asks, "Do you want us to leave?" And it chimes once for yes. And this is like on response, so it's fairly immediate. And this kind of makes us believe that this, whatever is communicating, is intelligent. So Alex doesn't think they're talking to a child at this point, but they sit down and try to communicate with the spirit. And he asks, "Are you the spirit that doesn't like males?" Ding. Yes. "You don't want me here?" Ding. No. "Should I leave?" Ding. Yes. And "Should I be afraid to be up here?" And again, yes. So each time it responds with just one chime, And that's all Chelsea needed to hear. And they're like, we got to go downstairs. And the music box chimes again, like, yes, yeah, you do. Maybe
It's
you
like
should get out of here.
they weren't even talking to the spirit at that point in time. They were just
Hmm.
talking to each other. And I think Alex was like, "Oh, we should go downstairs. I think, and like we should probably call Dakota." And it was like,
Hmm.
"Yup, like go
Yep.
downstairs, call your people, find some help because you're gonna need it." And
Hmm.
Dakota and Tanner are in the Devon building,
Hmm.
and they end up like going dark. And every time that happens, like something is bound to happen right after that.
Oh, for sure.
But they end up doing a digital recorder session, and Alex is radioing them at that point in time, like he said he was going to, and says,
Hmm.
"Hey, I have to tell you about this music box session that we just did." But while he does, Dakota and Tanner end up getting interrupted by the whistling again.
Hmm.
So they're like, "Dude, Alex, shush. We gotta go. Like, we don't care about your music box session right now, man. We'll tell you about what's happening to us in just a little bit." So they end up like trying to investigate where the whistling came from, and it leads them down to this like different section of the basement in the Devon building, and they end up being like, "Oh my god, here's the tunnels." And Tanner
Hmm.
even says, "You know what? I have the worst feeling right now. Like, I do not feel like we're alone." And then they hear like this shuffling at the end of the hallway, and before
Hmm.
you know it, they're like, "Wow, we're being like led into the tunnels." And not only are
Yeah.
they in the tunnels at that point in time too, but Chelsea and Alex get led into the tunnels as well.
Hmm. Yes, they get led into the tunnels of the Mayflower building. And when they're down there, they hear, and it is pretty loud, this loud hiss. It could be evil or demonic, like hisses are said to be. Like, usually on any paranormal show, anything that hisses at you is not a good thing. And you can physically see Chelsea kind of like back up. Like, she's hesitant to even continue going down there. And I would also be like, yeah, this thing doesn't want me down here. Like,
Some people could argue, like, "Oh, there might be an animal down there, like, it's a tunnel system, blah, blah, blah."
mm-mm,
You can't get into the tunnels just by, like, walking into them. Like, there are doors that separate them from
mm-hmm,
every part, so you either have to be in there or have been let in there, and
mm-hmm,
even if there was an animal in there, it is so loud that they would have known that there was an animal that was big enough to make that hiss
mm-hmm.
with them, so they didn't see anything.
And if it being that loud, especially with, like, night vision on, you'd probably see a reflection of an animal's eyes, let alone, like,
110%.
if a raccoon is down there or even a rat, like, the eyes are gonna reflect. But, after all this happens, it's now time to sleep alone.
Their last sleeping alone of this road trip.
Yes, the last sleeping alone arrangement. So we have Dakota in the second floor Devon building. They didn't really investigate here, so there's nothing that really happened there that we know about. Tanner is in the Mayflower tunnels. This is where King is said to be, and he doesn't like alpha males. And Tanner, he is our alpha male.
Mhm.
Chelsea is in the third floor of the Mayflower. This is where the chimes of the music box wanted Chelsea to stay and Alex to go. And Alex ends up being on the first floor of the Devon building. And this is where the whistling is. So,
I would not wanna be
yeah.
Chelsea. Not that I ever wanted to be in the tunnels either, but
Hmm.
knowing that we spent so much time in the Mayflower building, like, I would not wanna be on the 3rd floor. But she kind of, like,
Hmm.
accepts her fate at this point
Hmm.
in time, which I feel like she rarely does. I think she's usually, like, battling fate of, like, "Oh, seriously?" But she
Yeah.
says, like, she's at her location, and she says, like, we gotta go big or go home because we're gonna go home after this anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Might as
and really,
well.
the only thing she really hears at her location is possibly like somebody walking up the staircase and like some
Hmm.
movement. So she kind of gets off a little bit scot free. And Tanner says like he gets to his spot and he's like, I got my literal nightmare spot. Like I've had nightmares
Oh.
about this location for months. And he's even starting to doubt that, like, can I make it through the night? And just even like I was saying at the beginning of the episode, where he kind of turns away, his nonverbal body language is also saying, I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this.
Hmm.
I'm scared. And you can physically see that, which I don't think that we see from him too much, like throughout any of the episodes that we've watched. So
Hmm.
you know that it's something very impactful from the first go around, and he's really scared about what's going to happen to him in this go around.
And then yeah, with Chelsea's location, it does sound like someone's walking up the stairs, but I made note like it wasn't like someone going like step, step, step. It was almost like someone was putting a foot on a step and then trying to get the other foot on the next step and like
Mm,
continuing on. Like they had trouble walking. So there was people there that weren't able to walk. So I was like, maybe someone is just normally trying to go up the stairs.
that's a really good
Um,
insight too. Because like yeah,
yeah.
cuz like some people were like bedbound in like adult sized cribs and like
Mhm,
strapped there. Some people did have the ability to walk and some people really didn't, or they needed
mhm.
assistance to be able to do that, which is why they were chained in their beds for so long because they didn't have
Yeah.
the manpower to be able to do it. So I'm sure you had plenty of residents who were trying to like physically make it up to areas that they
Yeah, up
needed
the
to be by
stairs.
themselves.
Yeah, like, I kinda just saw someone, like, holding on to the railing, trying to go up
Mhm.
the stairs, but, then, we have Alex, and he has the Ovilus, and he expresses his condolences for the mistreatment and abuse, and the Ovilus says a random word, and it says, "eat." And he kind of realizes and notices that he is sitting across from a room that is just like full of lunch trays. They are like stacked, like taller than me, which is super freaking random. But it was just like, okay, like, how do we know? Like, there wasn't really a cafeteria. So maybe some of those people ate in the hallway that he was sleeping in.
Yeah, they were said to, like, have because some people also had, like, problems chewing, so they would puree
Mhm.
their meat and their vegetables together,
Right.
put it all in one bowl, and give it to them. And, like, if they didn't eat in under 10 minutes, they just didn't eat. So I think that they
Hmm.
just tried to, like, feed them kind of, like, when they could, so it makes sense that that's just saying that word because, like, that's might have been where, like, they had all of their meals. And I'm
Hmm.
sure that, like, instances came up like that, like, all over the place.
Hmm.
But we kind of pan to Tanner, who's exerting that dominance, that alpha male type of presence, right? Because he's asking, like,
Hmm.
is anybody down here with me? He actually calls out King and says, like, show yourself. And he
Yeah.
immediately hears this bang at the end of the hallway. He's rolling out the digital recorder and his IR light dies and he doesn't even notice. And
Yeah, but
he
it's the
asks,
second one. There's, like, a
yes,
static cam in front of him, and then there's one farther back, and then that one dies, so maybe he just, like, couldn't see
right, it was kind of like panning his whole
whole
experience, and so
hallway,
he
yeah.
doesn't notice that that goes out, but he
Mhm,
even asks like, "Oh, what's your name?" And he's listening to this, live review of a digital recorder session, and, like, I mean, clear as freaking day, it says, "Remember your nightmare," and you kind of
yeah,
hypothesize, like, what if King's messing with his head? Like,
mhm.
what if he's, like, trying to, like, overcome him, but not doing it his normal way, like, physically, like he said to, but, like, trying to come at him more, like, psychologically.
Yeah, because Tanner did verbally state while he was down there, "I've had nightmares about this place for months." So
Mhm,
that is almost like someone being like, "Okay, I'm gonna take this and roll with it." And maybe King was just like, instead of physically doing something, you've given me some information that like I don't even have to take that much energy out of me to do, and
mhm,
I can just say something. So maybe who knows, like, maybe it was building up for something else, but Tanner did
yeah.
give him
The ammo,
the
essentially.
ammo. Yeah, 100%. So, maybe he was just, like, psychologically wanted to mess with him a little bit, like, "Remember your nightmare," and, like, "I'm your nightmare now," kinda thing. But,
Mhm,
yeah, after that we have Alex and he hears movement and he reacts to it. Then he walkies Dakota and then hears a bang and possibly like a crashing and like falling. And Alex runs away and he gets Dakota to check it out with him. And soon they go back to their sleeping arrangement. And it was also, it was almost like it was like in between them. So
yeah.
they weren't too far away from each other, but I don't think they could really hear each other. if they were, like,
Because
talking to
Alex
each other.
hears that, but, like, Dakota
Yes.
doesn't, and then
Yeah.
another thing happens, and that's what they
Mhm.
both hear and can kinda,
Yes.
like, convene about their experience, but I think Dakota's just like, Let us go back to, like, our sleeping arrangements, like, we'll figure out what's going on."
Mhm.
And, like, nothing too much happens after,
No.
after that. They end up wrapping up, and Chelsea says, like, "I still think that we're freaking crazy for doing this," and it pans to Dakota for the last sleeping alone segment, and
Oh my
he's
god.
this is probably both of our LOL moments because I
Yeah.
don't think there's too much, like, funny stuff that we can come up with in this
No.
episode, but
Mhm.
in just, like, kind of like that weird karmic type fashion where I think spirits are always listening, like, Dakota's
Mhm.
like, "Oh, you know what? Like, the birds are chirping in the morning, like, there's no sleeping alone. This is it. This is final.
He's
No more."
smiling, he's
Yeah, like,
happy, it's the
"Oh,
last sleeping, it's the
hell
last
yeah."
location, we're done, but
They're celebrating.
you're still at your location, dude, you're celebrating a little bit too early.
Yeah, because as soon as he's like, "Oh, no more unexplained paranormal activity," a super loud bang happens, and he's like, "Yep,
Mhm.
you know what? We just gotta go. Like, I don't have to
Yeah.
prove anything to anybody anymore. We did it. It's over." And I
Mhm.
love that when they do end up going to their final like shot for this season, that they
Mhm.
don't have anything to say except for like everything about the growth that they've
Mhm.
experienced all road trip.
Yeah, yeah, like, Dakota is proud of all of them for their growth and hypothesizes that they may have negative side effects from this trip, and, like, 10 locations, you never know, and Dakota wants to up the ante for
Of course
next
he does.
season.
Of course he does.
He has an idea, everyone, and he's gonna up that ante. Alex gains a new perspective on fear and realizes it's so strong of an emotion, and he somewhat is still of a skeptic beforehand and has come out almost a believer from all of these experiences that he's had. Because remember, when we go back to the beginning of the season, he just gets thrown into it. And I love at the end of this, we have a shot of all four of
4 of
them.
them. I know,
The
it just gives
dream
me all the
team.
feels
All the
too.
feels. Welcome, Alex, to the. Oh my God, I just hit my microphone. Welcome, Alex, to the club.
I know, they, like, just have this, like, united little front, and, like, I love
Yes.
Tanner's recollection, like, his final thought of the whole road trip. He's like, "I became a better person on this road
Hmm.
trip. Like, it flipped my paranormal world upside down, and, like, I
Hmm.
have such a better understanding of, like, who I am, who we all are, and, like, what really happens when we're put in these locations to test our fear." And
Hmm.
Chelsea also recognizes like there's a lot of strength that came from going through all this adversity with the people that she loves, and she's even feeling thankful by the end of the road trip that she went on this experience, and I love that they
Hmm.
ended it on that note.
Yeah, and I also like was paying attention like when I was randomly watching this before we started filming. The music at the end for all those gamers out there, I don't know why, but this music really sounded like Diablo. I don't know if you've heard of Diablo. I've
No.
been playing Diablo 4. It's very like the guitar strings, and I was just like,
Mm.
oh man, very ominous. And Diablo is all about fighting demons.
Oh, well, how fitting and perfect to wrap up
How
the road
fitting,
trip with this.
right?
It's kinda like when Bobby Mackey, like, had the song on Trail of Terror that, like,
Mhm.
entered them into this whole entire, like, world. It was just so fitting, and that
Yeah.
makes sense that it's really fitting too, and, like,
Mhm.
y'all, we made it to the finale. It is
We
the
did
end
it.
of season 1. Cheers on
What?
that one.
Cheers. It's the end of their season and the end of our first season. What?
Yes, and like we mentioned last episode, we talked about it a little bit, but we're gonna tell you a
Mhm.
little bit about what's gonna go on in season 2. So, we're taking kind of a
Mhm.
turn. We're not saying
Yep.
we're never gonna go back to reviewing Destination Fear because this is
Yeah.
really what bonded us together in the first place,
Mhm.
but we have so many guests lined up for season
So
2, y'all.
many.
Like, it's not just gonna be this dynamic duo that you're so used to,
Mhm.
we love so much. We are also gonna have people that are not only like important to us, important to the
Mhm.
field, people that you might even follow along with anyway.
Mhm.
So, we're going to explore all the different beliefs about the afterlife, and we're going to get into some really specific stuff. some of which I'm sure you're just gonna be like dying to hear about because it's gonna be a little bit different than what we're experiencing already. But you'll still also have your dose of just the two of us too.
Yeah, like we love Project Fear, Destination Fear, and we just decided that, you know what, we're just gonna switch it up a little bit. We do love sharing our experiences with the paranormal, and since we and others have so many stories to tell, we also want to hear those stories from other people. And it just
Absolutely.
made the most sense. And even though we are ending season 1 right now, we aren't taking much of a break. So season 2, we are picking up where we left off. We're like next week, you are going to join us on season 2. And next week, we are kicking it off with two members that some of you may know, and they are in the Fear fam. Heyo, we are welcoming Emily and Kayla to the
Yay!
party. Yes, so there is
We
going to
can't
be
wait.
four of us girlies from the Fear Club who are going to be sharing our experiences with ghosts, and I can't wait to hear their stories.
Yeah, I'm super pumped. It just is really awesome that we're ending it because of Destination Fear season one
Mhm,
finale, and we're starting off our season two with people from the Fear fam. It just really
mhm,
makes it all come together. We're
mhm.
really excited to talk to them, and you guys can catch us every Thursday. 12 p.m. Mountain
Yeah.
Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. You do not want to miss the second season. So
No.
we will see you next week. No break. And the only break that we're going to have right now is to cheers to the end of season one, y'all. Thanks for coming on the ride with
Yes.
us. And
Thank
we
you,
can't
and
wait to see where it goes.
we can't wait to see it. Cheers for the fears, baby.
Bye.
Bye.